Hello and welcome to Undercommon Taste. This is a podcast where we create and discuss homebrew content for tabletop RPGs.
Money, it's a gas, so grab that stash with both hands and make a dash.
I'm Ian Woodworth. I'm joined by my co-host James Daly, and I don't think that's exactly how the lyrics go.
Is it not?
No. Grab that cash with both hands and make a stash.
Make a stash, okay.
I think that's how it goes.
Now I have to look it up.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you did look it up.
No, that's like... so the old rock station I grew up with played Pink Floyd all the time. I actually rather enjoy Pink Floyd, except at like 3 and 4 in the morning when I'd have to drive into work. And of course it's 4:20, so they're playing Pink Floyd, and I'm tired as hell trying to get to the lab. And like, you're going to put me to sleep on the highway, you suck.
Anyway, as you may or may not have guessed, today we are going to be talking a little bit about TTRPG economics, because there are constantly these threads that I see on Reddit or the YouTube shorts or whatever with people talking about how my players are going to do this, this, and this. They're going to buy up all of the iron daggers and they're going to use the fabricate spell to turn them all into suits of full plate and sell them back and crash the economy. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about economies in your tabletop games and how they may or may not actually have to follow the rules.
Fair.
Because
it is fantasy, hello.
Yeah. And this comes from the same place of, do you really track encumbrance? You don't necessarily have to adhere to the rules of supply and demand when it comes to running an economy in a tabletop game. Because it is a game, it is not real. There is not real currency exchanging hands here, unless that's how you play, in which case, good on ya.
That actually was a scenario that I wanted to run when we did the Facebook game. We tried to do a game off Facebook Messenger when they had an auto die roller forever ago. That was actually one of the premises I wanted as part of the game as you guys got further in, was you guys were going to come to another city where the economy was just upside down bonkers. And so like when you guys were getting ready to pay for an inn or something, and you pulled out your silver, like everyone at the tavern was going to look at you like you were just insanely wealthy, because the town was run by lycanthropes, so they were getting rid of anything magic and silver because those are the only things that really damage lycanthropes. So gold was worth much, much less than silver because silver became so scarce, and that was going to be part of like just the economy in this whole area was completely flipped.
Right, yeah. And we didn't make it that far in that play-by-post.
No, unfortunately not.
Then, honestly, I don't know that Messenger was the best tool to use for that.
Probably not, but I did want to give it a shot. And
yeah, it was worth giving a shot.
And I mean, as we talk about, developing your games, that is one thing, is give stuff a shot. It might work wonderfully or it might fall flat on its face.
Yeah, you don't necessarily know that something isn't going to work until you try it and it doesn't work.
Yeah. A big part was the dice roller bot was a little clunky, and then keeping everyone's posts where they weren't talking over the top of each other just didn't fit right. So that was a problem. But again, I think in a different format it could work, just not through Messenger.
And I think that part of it was that we were all still in the play in person mentality of playing D&D.
Yeah.
And you have to treat play by post differently than that.
Yes.
And I think that is a big chunk of the reason why it ended up fizzling out.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back on
rabbit
topic,
trails everywhere,
right? Where would we be without the rabbit trails? Stuck in the middle of the woods, that's where we'd be. So, as I have alluded to, the most important note that I have to address at the beginning of this topic is that your economy doesn't have to be balanced or logical. You can make a logical, balanced economy if you want to, but that's going to require effort and time. And if you decide that you would rather spend that effort and time on other aspects of the game, go ahead and do that.
I mean, very few players are going to sit there and really needle you over the economy unless that is their game. And like I said, there are some games that are going to be economy focused, in which case you do want to put a little more time, but most you could probably just hand wave it and like, it's just how it is. And people, okay, fine. As long as the game keeps up a steady pace, even if the economy's broken, as long as it works fairly for the party and everyone playing, it's not going to be a huge deal.
Right. And as long as everyone who is playing the game is satisfied with the way that it actually works.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely something to bring up in a session 0 is if you want a game where the function of the economy is a mechanical aspect of gameplay, that needs to be addressed at session 0 and make sure that everybody in the party is okay with that, or at least okay with the way that you're planning on executing that. But I mean, you can absolutely have all of your vendors be like World of Warcraft vendors, where any vendor that you go to, you can sell an item for its sale price. They have unlimited currency. You can always sell these things for their sell price to that vendor, to any vendor that is capable of buying things. And with only a few exceptions, they have an unlimited supply of the items that they have for sale, as long as you have the right currency for it. There may be certain items that have a limited stock, but by and large, as long as you got the money, you can buy as many of these things as you want and they'll never run out. You can absolutely play a game like that. There's nothing wrong with that game.
And I think with that too, if you're going to have like the vendors kind of coming back into that well reference too, something that I don't see often in tabletop games that you absolutely see more in video games because it's so much easier to do is that disparity of what a vendor is going to buy something for versus what they sell it. Generally, at a tabletop game, if you get a potion and it's worth, 150 gold pieces, the player's going to sell it for 150 gold pieces and they're going to buy it for 150 gold pieces. Where again, if you want to do calculations or like, again, something more computer driven, you might buy it for 150 gold pieces, but you might only sell it for 75. And with this too, you can start throwing in charisma checks to see if they can kind of schmooze up or maybe barter with the shopkeep and see what percentage of the actual price they could buy or sell for, if they could maybe elevate that sell price or lower that buy price sometimes too. Again, that gets very papery, very calculation heavy. Again, if you're doing something more computer driven, it's easier to do than on paper unless you've got tables already set.
And that also leads to the horror stories that you read about, players who just have a very high charisma skill, have a very high persuasion or negotiation or whatever the skill is called in your game. And they just steamroll their way through shops, browbeating NPCs into basically highway robbery. So that all being said, you still have the power as the storyteller, as the DM, to tell them no.
No. And honestly, in a real world scenario, if there was someone that came into particularly a small town, but even, a city, and they start, the shopkeep's going to be coming back, and at looking back, you're going to have buyer's or seller's remorse. I'm like, okay, maybe I didn't get the best deal. Okay, one on me. And then they talk to the other shop. Yeah, this dude came in, and you know what? Totally talk circles around me. Next thing I know, half my shop's empty, and he's walking out laughing. And by the time the third or fourth shopkeeper hears this, they're going to have a mark on that person. And whether they send the Thieves Guild or the Assassin Guild to make them go away, no matter what, that person walks in the door, they're not doing business with them.
Right. Yeah. That is absolutely something that should happen. In-game actions should have in-game consequences.
Absolutely. And this can lead to something, again, your level 2 or 3 party, your rogue goes in, your bard goes in, and yeah, he schmoozes up everybody, and he basically fiscally loots the town. And you guys leave with your bags full. 3-4 sessions later, you can tie that event back in for a story hook because, yeah, now that bard, that rogue, whomever, absolutely has a target, and people are coming for them, and they want their money back. They want their item back. They want revenge in some way. So now you've got this band of hunters after your party. And how are you going to resolve that? Are you going to try to fight each one that comes? Are you going to try to hide? Are you going to try to recompense and settle things out? And you can build a lot of story off of just the actions or random actions of a player.
Or, they go back to the town after completing a couple of tasks, and you can see the decay caused by their actions whenever they return to town. These stores are not restocked. The alchemist shop is closed because he could not continue operating because you basically robbed him of his stock and he didn't have the capital to resupply, to restock. And so now the town doesn't have an alchemist, doesn't have a healer anymore. And so maybe now there is some sickness that has come into town and there's nobody there to cure it.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking just that. So, your party goes and does whatever adventure, be it a D&D adventure, be it a kids on bike adventure. You go back, let's think of kids on bike. You sat there and you looted the local corner shop and, you sit there, you get roughed up and, your characters are in bad shape and they're going to go back to the shop. Well, they sell first aid kits there. That's exactly what we need. And you walk in the store and they want nothing to do with you because, you stole from them basically, and sorry about your luck. Go on to the next thing. But the next town's like 3 miles away and you've got to go through the bully's territory and they're after you for something you did too. And again, you could totally do this. And it doesn't have to be a fantasy setting. You can do this with a lot of different things.
And it doesn't have to be you come into the store and they refuse to do business with you. It could be you come around the corner and where the store was is an empty storefront.
Yeah.
There is no store there to sell you first aid kits anymore.
Yeah.
And that will also, I think that would more poignantly drive home the point to your players that your in-game actions have in-game consequences.
Yes. And that in itself is, again, your actions are an economy of themselves.
Right, yes. So getting into if you want to sort of make an economy that makes sense within your game, there are a few aspects that you want to think about whenever you're putting everything together. The first one, and the most important one, I think, is what is the general level of wealth in your setting? Are we talking about your typical fantasy medieval European type setting where you have a peasantry that is basically penniless? I mean, if you look back in some of the older versions of D&D, they'll say things like a peasant family may never see a gold piece in their life.
I remember reading, I think it was a 3 or 3.5 edition book that basically equated a gold piece would be enough to buy a horse. When, again, even through ancient times, owning a horse was a huge deal. It's not an easy thing to do now. Horses are expensive. And looking about it, I mean, right now, gold's like right around $2,800 an ounce, which not too far off the price of a horse.
Yeah. So in 5th edition, they modified that a little bit. It's a little more affluent. So, for example, a poor lifestyle is 2 silver a day. So that's a little more than 1 gold a week.
Okay.
And then a wealthy lifestyle is 4 gold a day. And an aristocratic lifestyle is a minimum of 10 gold per day.
That makes sense with that. And again, too, when you're trying to do that medieval fantasy and you are using, gold pieces, copper pieces, even if you want to do something like an industrial revolution and you're still dealing with, hard currency that was based off of metals, it's harder to kind of wrap your mind around. I think another series or net or game system that kind of gives you that feel of what wealth and stuff is at the time was Old Gods of Appalachia. And it has to deal with like the Dust Bowl and the Depression era right around there. And they kind of work to kind of give that feel that things are run down. You might have a Vanderbilt, a Hearst, but generally most of the people are going to be poor farmers or poor city workers that are just like doing factory work. But a lot of it is day to day, week to week.
Absolutely, yeah. So whenever you're talking about your setting and the economy of your setting, a setting that has just generally a low wealth, so this sort of medieval European style feel setting, you're going to have an economy that deals primarily in necessities. So you're going to have food, you're going to have raw materials, you're going to have simple utility goods. Those are the things that you should be able to find in most places.
A lot of your tasks are going to be done in barter and trade and not necessarily in money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're going to be trading favors.
Absolutely. If you really want that low economy setting, there are going to be lots of you do this task for me and you'll have 2 square meals and a roof over your head tonight. That would be a completely reasonable expectation in one of these settings.
You do this for me, and I know a person who might have the information you want.
Right.
I know where the thing is, but I need something in return first. I owe somebody something and I don't have the way to pay them back now. You make that debt go away and I can help you with this, but I have to handle this first.
Right. So if the majority of the population is making the equivalent of a silver a week or less, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in those sorts of scenarios to have things like an enchanter's shop or a bookstore or a silversmith in every single town. You know, those are things that are going to be only in the most affluent cities, in the biggest, most affluent cities. You're going to end up having lots of very simple, very utilitarian craftsmen in your towns. You're going to have a blacksmith. You're going to have woodworkers. You're going to have weavers. And honestly, a lot of these things are going to be done by people by themselves in their own homes.
Now, with this too, because if you're kind of going out, you could have that prodigy blacksmith that is kind of working on their apprenticeship and they're just amazing at their craft. Inversely, you could have the old retiree who's moved back home and he's tired, they are tired of the city life and, they want to bring something back to where they came from. So they are going to make a higher quality item for their neighbors.
Absolutely, yeah. And the more affluent a setting becomes, the more specialized and artisanal the professionals will become. You're going to get more artisans in a wealthier setting.
Yeah, because
there's going to be the people who can actually pay for that. I mean, if you're going to have a silversmith, they're going to be where the people who can pay them for their silversmithing are going to be. It won't make any sense for them to set up in some backwater town where nobody can afford what they're making.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, art takes time. And so, the time that you're spending doing art, you're not farming, you're not foraging. And then just the material itself is going to be above and beyond. So if you can't afford just base silver, there's no way they could afford the time that's going to be spent to craft it either. And so that's where that economy is going to drift to where the wealthy people are, because they can just throw money and they can, patronize, quite literally, an artist, and they can pay them for their time, or so they can take the time to perform their craft.
And so an example of this would be, let's say an aristocrat wants to get a very fine suit of magical plate armor. There would be a whole list of artisans involved in the making of this. So you're going to have an armorer who's going to make the base set of armor, and you're actually going to have different armorers working on different parts. You're going to have one that just does breastplates. You've got one that just does shoulders. You've got one that just does gloves. You've got one that just does boots. And then they're going to take all of those individual parts. Once they're made, they're going to send them to an engraver who is going to etch into this armor, make the engravings, and then possibly even send it to a goldsmith for some filigree work, and send it to a lapidary for gems to be cut and mounted into this for holding enchantments, and then ultimately going to an enchanter to be enchanted. And this isn't all happening with one person. That sort of Renaissance man, that Leonardo da Vinci type person, that is not how most of these crafts would have been done. You would have had specialized artisans who focus on one detail of the craft, and it would have been passed from one artisan to the next, to the next, to the next, until finally the job is done.
That said, too, and this will work both with a high wealth or a low wealth setting, but you have the things that you can buy with everyday coin. You have the things you can barter with for food or supplies. And then you have that dark underbelly of the black market. And it's the contraband and the things that people don't really say they trade, or they're not supposed to be trading, whether it be like an embargo, or, whether it's, like I said, it's some sort of contraband or something along those lines. And you can build a flourishing economy around the black markets as well.
You can, yeah. And that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute.
Okay, sorry, jumping ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. But going back a little bit to what you started off with saying, there are goods that will be available for you to just walk into a store and buy. But there comes a point where, after a certain point, they're not going to be making these things and just sitting them on a shelf. It takes too much time and money to make them. It's not worth their while to make it and then just let it sit until somebody happens along to buy it. You're going to have a scenario where there are things that can only be made by commission.
Yeah.
And as you advance in affluence and as you advance in technology level, you're going to end up being able to just walk in and buy more and more advanced things.
Right. And so a lot of these things might even be just half completed. So when I worked at William King Museum of Art, they talked about the Great Wagon Road that ran from Philadelphia down through Appalachia. And at the time, one of the big things you could do to show your wealth was family portraits, because photography was not around yet. So a lot of artists would travel down this road and they would have half-painted pictures where they would have a background and a body more or less prefabbed and done. And they'd find a buyer where they'd just slap a face on there for the buyer and like, there you go, there's your picture. Some of these more complex things like a suit of armor, something heavily engraved, something that is more ornate, they might have your base, whatever, and then they would add on to it. I think second and third edition covered this a little bit better with going back to D&D, where in order for something to be magical, it had to start off as a +1 or masterwork item.
Right.
Before you could build onto that. And a lot of that's been kind of hand waved away. But a lot of these places are going to have that like one really good, piece of leather that I'm going to do something special with this and I just don't know what it is yet. And being able to find the artist with that and finding the good materials could be a quest in its own right.
Yeah, and, if you can find the artisans and then supply them with materials, they can make you some pretty fancy stuff. And, bringing Isaac Asimov in here for a little bit, the level of magic in your setting can have an equal effect as technology to this. So if you have more common and pervasive magic, then you can have more advanced items that you can just walk into a store and buy.
Yes, and that is Clark.
Is it Clark?
That's Clark.
Arthur C. Clarke?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love my 50s sci-fi.
Yeah, sorry. I just got those two mixed up.
Fine.
Yeah.
No, you're fine.
So the next question that I would have is, what is your setting's economic system?
Okay.
I mean, are you talking about a feudal society where people are tied to the land and so they don't really have their own wealth? Their wealth is what is afforded them by the person who owns the land that they live on.
I didn't vote for you.
You don't vote for kings. Is it a capitalist society? So one where everything has a value and ostensibly your labor is compensated with currency that you then use to buy goods and services. And everything is based on your capital, what you own, what you have access to, that controls how much buying power you have, what you can afford to get, things of that nature. Where everything is a commodity that has a monetary value and can be bought or sold for a monetary value. On the opposite end, you could be a communist society where currency probably doesn't have a whole lot of value at all, where everyone has access to the same goods and services and is able to get whatever they happen to need at any given time. In an ideally working communist society, capitalism tends to weasel its way into communist societies, and so the people at the top in power live a capitalist lifestyle while everyone else is forced to live a communist lifestyle, and it ends up getting words. What's the word I'm looking for?
Muddled?
Yeah,
corrupt?
I guess.
We'll go with corrupt. Corrupt sounds good.
Corrupt. You end up getting USSR in the 70s and 80s.
That said, blending these could actually be a really interesting thing to do. And again, you could run this with a bunch of different systems, but look at the US and large parts of Europe too during World War II, when everything was rationed because, we had the war effort and, things had to go overseas for troops and stuff like that. So yeah, maybe the store is filled with whatever you want, be it, magic items, be it bread, be it bicycles, be it guns. But your ration card says you can only get one, and that shopkeeper will only give one thing for one ration card. How do you work around that?
Right, absolutely. Also, you could end up having more of a socialist sort of thing where private property does exist. You do have that private market, but a lot of your necessary things are provided by an overarching structure, an overarching governmental system.
So this would be like the Roman grain dole, things like that. I mean, not a great example, but again, your food, your base necessities are covered and they are provided. So the people aren't going to be necessarily clamoring for food. They're going to try to be using what little extra they have for something of better or greater benefit than just bare necessities.
Right. So, yeah, if you have the means, you can always buy above the baseline, but you're always guaranteed the baseline.
Yeah.
Again, this is in an idealized functioning system.
It's fantasy. We're good.
It is fantasy, yes. You can have a utopia in your fantasy setting. And of course, you can also have an anarchy where everyone is out for themselves and it is moderated by the fact that anything you do to other people can do to you.
Say it with me, boys and girls. Chaos, woohoo. I think a fun thing to do, though, too, is if you are going to different regions or different areas, to incorporate a blend of these. It'll be a good kind of culture shock for your players, a good change of pace, and so it'll keep them on their toes and keep them thinking and active.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a thing where this is something that I had played with for a while in one of my settings. This one group of people didn't really have a sense of property ownership of like material things. So like tools and objects of that nature, as long as they weren't, personalized things, like jewelry is a personalized thing, clothing is a personalized thing. That is something that you would own.
Not shiny toothbrush.
Yeah, but like a hammer or a horse cart, those are things that are just there. And if you need it, you just use it and you put it back when you're done.
Oh, that's so as a crafter, as things I do some metalwork, I do stonework, I do lapidary. Not every hammer's the same.
Oh, I know that. I know that better than most.
Yes.
But that's just the way
it's fantasy.
Yeah, and that's just the way that their society worked. And so whenever people would leave that society, they would always run into issues where, people would accuse them of theft whenever the concept of theft, as these outsiders see it, just did not exist in their society, because the idea of theft is taking something and not putting it back when you're done with it. It's taking something and keeping it.
That was, again, this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but trust me, it follows. So when I was in junior college, I worked for our chemical stockroom, and there was a lady that worked in there with us, and for the life of me right now, I can't remember her name. She was a little bit older than I was, as in my early 20s. And she had actually come from Uzbekistan right after the fall of the Soviet Union. And she was coming through here. She was going through Western college because she wanted to go to medical school, because she was starting medical school when she was in the Soviet Union. But she had told me a story that when she was in high school, they were dealing with some stuff and they had pellets versions of sodium hydroxide. And she said she was curious. And so she poured a bunch into her backpack to take it home, and it wound up corroding and destroying her school books, so she had to go get new ones. I'm like, so you stole the chemicals from the school? And she's like, no, it was all of ours because we all owned it. Nobody owned the bottle of chemicals. It just belonged to anyone who needed it in the class. She misappropriated it, yes, but it wasn't theft as we would imagine it. So it was like one of those kind of like, oh, okay, different cultures, different things. But yeah, she did get in trouble because they had to spend money to replace the books because, again, she misused the material. But
yeah, that would actually be a pretty good example of that. So getting into your black market commentary. So, are there certain things that are guaranteed in this economy? Are there certain things that are prohibited in this economy? Are there certain things where if you want more or different, you have to go through unofficial channels to get it?
I think one series that generally does tackle economy well in a lot of different ways, Star Trek, particularly the Next Generation, where they are hitting different planets at different times. And they hit this topic several times, like what things can the average person expect? Like, what is everyone guaranteed? What are they not? What about the things that you should have that you can't? Like, I remember they had one where medical care was guaranteed to everyone. It's just if you're on the upper crust, you got a lot better medical care. And the people who were lower on the economic scales were trying to smuggle in or smuggle out those medical goods so they could treat their population. And, the uppity-ups, that 1%, were like, grr, this is all ours, it's too good for you. And they're like, our original charter was we're all supposed to receive the same kind of medical care.
Yeah, that is also a very good example of that. And, going back to talking about rationing or, going back a little bit earlier, talking about prohibition. Alcohol is outlawed during prohibition, but you can still get it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just a matter of who you know and what steps are you willing to take and how much are you willing to pay to get it. And the amount that you're willing to pay to get it is also going to determine how safe it is for you to drink it.
Fair.
Because it might, if you buy the cheap stuff, the cheap bathtub gin, it might literally make you go blind. And the reason for that is because whenever they're fermenting it in a bathtub, if there are any cracks in the ceramic coating on this cast iron bathtub, it can leach the iron out, which causes, I can't remember what chemical it ends up creating in the...
Methanol.
Well, I think methanol happens regardless.
Okay.
I think this is a different chemical compound, but something happens if it comes in contact with the iron of the cast iron, which is why you're only supposed to use copper and stainless steel whenever you're brewing and distilling alcohol.
Gotcha.
But whatever that chemical compound is, that is what would make you go blind.
That's some good stuff.
And it's also why, whenever you're distilling it, that the first few pulls you have to toss, you have to throw away, because that is the methanol, because it has a lower boiling point than the ethanol.
Yeah.
And so that will also make you very sick and potentially kill you.
Distillation is magic.
It is. So those are some examples. And going back to talking about rationing, if you're able to get multiple ration books somehow, and you're able to distribute your ration cards to 3 or 4 different locations using 3 or 4 different ration books, you can get more than you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Which will have certain consequences if people find out. But it will also open up the availability of that person to start doing sort of a black market thing where they can then trade this excess that they're getting for other things that they need from other people.
Absolutely. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be nefarious things that are black market. It could be art. It could be maybe for whatever reason, the color green is banned wherever you're at and you want something green. Medieval Europe, again, you had some street laws where you just couldn't have certain kinds of clothing or because it was too expensive or it was beyond that. And maybe you're headed out of town and you want a green shirt for whatever reason. This would be something under the black market.
Right. Or this is something that happened a lot. The city that you're in is under siege. And so food is starting to run out. And so now there is a black market for things like bread or eggs or meat, the things that you need to survive. But the people who have it know that they have a premium on the market. And so they are able to extort the other people in the city to get the best deal that they can get out of the situation.
Well, I love that. So like if you're running something like futuristic or cyberpunk and everyone's getting their nutrition, it's, again, we can go back to that socialist society. Everyone's provided their nutrition through pills like the old sci-fi Soylent Green. But maybe you want fresh meat, and that's black market. Where are you going to find fresh meat from? I think in the original Blade Runner, they talked about pets, and you could actually buy a live pet. They were super expensive, and you had to have permits for them, so very few people had them. But if you didn't want a robot dog, you could jump through all of these legal hoops and get a real dog.
Yeah, that's also a good example, yeah. And then the last big question that I have for whenever I'm putting together an economy is, what, if anything, is used as currency and why? In most cases, the currency is going to be something that has an intrinsic value. Now, whether the value is from the material that the currency is made from and its intrinsic scarcity or its usefulness or both. One example that you hear a lot, and it's often exaggerated of the importance, but it is an actual historical example, is salt. Salt was something that was used in every aspect of medieval life and ancient life. And if you didn't live on the coast or you didn't have your own salt mine, you had to trade to get it.
They say that the Roman legionnaires, part of their pay was a ration of salt.
Absolutely, yeah. It was that a ration of salt and a ration of grain, I think?
Yeah. And then if you were an officer, you got spices like nutmeg.
Yeah. So salt is a good example. Gold is one of those things that has long been used as a currency, partly because of its scarcity, partly because of the intrinsic value of it's pretty.
Yeah. Going back, talking about the Roman legions, again, spices absolutely could be used as currency.
They absolutely could. A couple of other game examples that I really like. The original Fallout.
Yes.
Nuka-Cola caps were used as a currency because they were backed by the traders of the hub and the value of the cap was based off of the price of fresh water.
Yeah.
So it was actually a water-backed security, these Nuka-Cola caps. They had value because the water had value because it was scarce in the desert in this post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Again, you're looking at Southern California. I don't think they've got them under control. I haven't seen them in the news recently, but you had those huge fires in Southern, and we're always talking about the scarcity of water. Southern and Western California is almost always in a drought. Water's always at a premium, always.
Except recently where they
got flooded.
Basically got inundated because a certain somebody had to go on an ego trip and leave the dam gates open.
Yeah, that's going to suck in the summertime.
Oh, it's going to be so bad. It's going to be so bad. Anyway, another game media, and this is one that is less well known, I think. The Metro video game series. The only one I've played is Metro 2033, in which case ammunition is used as currency because it has its own intrinsic value, because this is a zombie survival horror game. So you need ammunition to be able to shoot the zombies and save your life.
Always a good thing to have.
Yeah, but the ammunition is also used as currency. And because the reloaded ammunition is not as good as the old factory-produced ammunition, if you can find pre-zombie ammunition, it's worth more.
So actually there is a historical analog to this in, again, Old West. You'd go to a bar and a quote, quote, a shot of whiskey was about the same cost as a 45 caliber round. It's actually why it's called a shot.
Yeah, that's why it's called a shot, because you would pay for it with a 45 caliber round. Another example that you could use is aluminum, actually, because for the longest time, aluminum was one of those metals that it was understood that it was there, but nobody knew how to get it into a usable form.
It was thought to be mythic for quite a while as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, this is pure conjecture on my part. I would think that the examples of mithril, the mythical properties of mithril, they line up pretty well with aluminum in most cases.
I've heard people try to tie it to titanium as well, but I think aluminum is probably a better fit.
Yeah, and for the longest time, if you got aluminum metal, you got it by accident.
Oops.
And it was very difficult to reproduce how you got it because it was hard to figure out how you did it in the first place.
Fair. Very fair. Alchemy's a thing.
And then I can't remember the guy's name, but I think it was a guy in Sweden who was working with, I want to say he was working with bauxite and found a way to extract pure aluminum metal from the bauxite. And for a time, aluminum was worth more than sterling silver.
Oh, wow.
Getting a service set made out of aluminum was a
flex.
Yeah, it was. That was what you bought. If you couldn't afford the full silver service set, but you wanted to be hoity-toity, you didn't want pewter, you went past the sterling silver and you went into aluminum.
Okay.
And then I think it was about another 15 years later, a different guy figured out a way to refine aluminum from ores on an industrial scale, and the price of aluminum fell through the floor almost overnight.
It's like Dutch tulips.
It's similar to Dutch tulips. I mean, Dutch tulips would be another example of
Of a
something
good
that could be
currency,
used as
yeah.
a currency that's very volatile.
Oh, economic bubbles.
But, without that industrial production of aluminum and the value of aluminum dropping so substantially, you wouldn't have had things like the aerospace industry.
Yeah.
There's no way to build an airplane that will actually fly out of steel.
No, they used to use wood and canvas, actually. Even early World War II fighters were wood and canvas,
Yes.
particularly the Spitfire.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are multiple elements to all of that. So, you could have a currency that ends up becoming worthless, but then ends up.
NFTs.
Yeah, we're getting to that.
But my monkey.
But my monkey. And, there's a whole. I don't even know where I was going with that. Anyway. But another thing about a currency is that it might not be some rare or valuable or useful object. It might just be a currency because there is a faction that is powerful enough to say, this is the currency.
Yeah.
This is the money. This is what has value.
Yeah.
I mean, an example of that is the US dollar.
Yeah.
The US dollar used to be tied to gold. It used to be tied to the value of gold. And then I think it was in the 1920s, they decided to divorce it from the value of gold. I am not going to advocate for returning to the gold standard. There are a whole lot of economic details that are way above my knowledge level to be making those sorts of comments. But I will admit that a lot of my knowledge about this comes from a Netflix documentary that I watched a while back where they were advocating for returning to the gold standard.
So the really big final divorce was during Nixon. And what happened is we had a lot of European countries that owed us quite a bit of money for goods and services during World War II. And they came up with this good idea that they had their gold reserves from World War II, and they flooded the market with gold, which was dropping the value of the US dollar. And then they were paying their debts off. Oh, here you go. Oh, we dropped your dollar 15%. Oh, look, here's our bill. And so that was one of the big reasons to divorce that. Good idea, bad idea, very debatable. I do know that was the reason was people were trying to influence our economy by artificially skewing gold prices.
And I mean, any sort of market manipulation is going to happen with whatever currency you have.
Yes.
But whenever the currency is, this is what we say the value is, and we will issue bonds saying that this is what it's worth, and we will guarantee that those bonds will be paid.
Yes.
That is how the value of the US dollar is maintained, is through treasury bonds and through the government saying, okay, we will pay this off. We will pay this to you if you present it and ask for repayment.
This is kind of an aside, but if you followed along with us this far and you're really interested in economics, there's a web series called Extra History, and they actually have, I think it's like a 5 or 6 episode, and I think the episodes are like 15 minutes each, but they cover economics and how money works and how it's developed over the years. And it's actually a really good, set of videos to watch, and it doesn't take a super long time. They're well done. If you are really into economics, if it really kind of interests you like it kind of does me, definitely worth a watch.
Yeah. And going back to something that you said just a little bit ago, another example of a currency that is valuable because somebody says it has value would be crypto or NFTs.
I just wanted to see if I could make you scream on stream.
Well, you are greatly overestimating how much I care about NFTs.
Fair.
I mean, I am the kind of person who, if you're gullible enough to buy into an unregulated currency market and lose all your money, that is your problem.
But my monkeys, it's my monkey.
NFTs never made any sense to me. I mean, I understand how they were marketed and how they were supposed to work.
Yeah.
But that's not how data works.
No.
Crypto, at least with the blockchain, you do have a record. It does have a tangible thing that you can go back to. However, the blockchain diverges.
The blockchain's the blockchain things.
Yeah, I don't understand all of it. All that I know is that it is hosted on multiple servers, and each time it is copied to a new server, it has the chance of diverging, and then you end up having issues where you end up having two crypto bits that have the same blockchain value, and you have to determine which one of them is the valid bit. And that is entirely determined on which record you're comparing it to.
So it's like DNA transcription. That's kind of cool. We're going to make AI based off the blockchain, and it's going to be terrible.
Oh, they've already tried it. They've already been talking about doing that.
Oh my, yeah, that's
we're just gonna
So we didn't fully talk about dystopias.
That's because we're living in one.
Oh, yeah, fair. That's right. We're trying to escape.
I mean, we talked about things like, black markets. We talked about, scarcity. We talked about how to get the things that you cannot otherwise get.
Sanity.
Those are all dystopia things. I mean, honestly, talking about like bottle caps from Fallout. And ammunition from Metro. Those are both dystopias.
Yes, they are.
I don't want to live in a world where I have to live in a fortified subway terminals because the surface of the earth is crawling with alien zombies.
Fair. Very fair.
So anyway, we kind of devolved a little bit there at the end and got a little silly. But, this is something that I think a lot of people have talked about, talking about the horror stories of flooding a town's economy, draining all of the gold from a town's economy and, milking it for everything it's worth.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, these are sorts of things that only happen if the DM allows it. And I think that this is one of those very clear-cut examples of times when the DM needs to learn to say no. When the DM needs to exert that little bit of authority that they've got. That's to say, hey, this is going to negatively impact the game for everybody. Don't do it.
Though, again, a little FAFO is never a bad idea. Your player's actions should have consequence. Even if it's something...
In-game actions, in-game consequences.
Absolutely. But if you're wanting to build up the system, if you're looking towards world building in general, you can do a lot with just the economy as a starting block and foundation. Think about what you want the money to be, how you want things to work. And again, if something's going to be scarce or abundant or, how easy trade is, that really does give you a good scaffolding to start building other things around. So again, using your economy as a world building tool is also a really good idea.
All right, I think we have gotten about as much as we're going to get out of this one tonight.
Alrighty.
So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have any comments, suggestions, or ideas, send us an email, undercommentaste@gmail.com, or come and join us on our Discord and tell us directly. You can find a link to the Discord along with all of our social media through our website, undercommentaste.com. You can also find links there to our Patreon, patreon.com/undercommentaste, and our itch store, undercommentaste.itch.io. One thing that I do want to point out is that the Solo But Not Alone 5 bundle is now live.
Huzzah.
I had to record a little blurb and insert it into the last episode, but the bundle is now live. I think it is running to the middle of May. I think she extended it because she had issues getting it together and getting it launched on time. So go check that out. It's, I think, 107 games. Base price is $10. You're supporting a great charity. There's some great games in there. I've started looking through, I've started digging through, I've started playing a couple of them. James and I are both going to try and do some game review stuff. And we actually have a Solo But Not Alone channel on our Discord. If you buy the bundle and you want to come and chat about some of the games and your thoughts on the games and how your gameplay for that particular game played out, feel free to come over and do that.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear about your solo games and what you had happen in your game. That sounds fascinating to me.
Again, if this is your first episode, welcome. We're very happy you found us. You can find our podcast on your podcatcher of choice. Just search Under Common Taste on your podcatcher of choice. You can also join me on Twitch on Mondays and Thursdays, where I am revisiting some classic and some slightly newer-ish games, mostly RPGs, where, again, we enjoy the game, but we also talk about RPG, game design, game elements, as we muddle through some old memories as well. So it's a bit of nostalgia.
And that's twitch.tv/undercommontaste.
Yes.
All right. Stay safe, everyone, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Happy gaming.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Under Common Taste. Our theme song is Massacre Ann, written and performed by Mary Kroll and used with permission. You can find Mary online at marykroll.bandcamp.com or on Patreon at patreon.com/Dr. Mary C. Kroll. Our logo is by David Sutherland. You can find more of David's work on deviantart.com/David Sutherland or on instagram.com/Willex_73. We'll be back in 2 weeks, so stay safe, and we'll see you then.